It's sort of well known that Africans don't have access to the same kind of financial infrastructure that the rest of the world have. So I do think that I have a unique opportunity down there, and that's why I'm so excited about Bitcoin and always have been, because I just see a world down in Africa that can be fixed with something like Bitcoin.
Lorien Gamaroff is the CEO and co-founder of Centbee, a South African startup that's dedicated to making payments easier and cheaper using Bitcoin SV. Centbee has developed a practical solution that integrates their wallet with a network of thousands of African retailers, large and small. Anyone with a Centbee wallet can issue an invoice to a customer who can then make a payment in the local currency at one of these stores. The payment is processed as a BSV transfer to the issuer's wallet. Lorien's work for Centbee is driven by a mix of business ambition and more personal motives that come from his own life in Zimbabwe and South Africa, as I discovered when we talked in London.
You're listening to CoinGeek Conversations with Charles Miller.
So Lorien, thank you very much for doing this interview.
Thanks, Charles. It's really nice to chat to you.
Let's start by giving people just an idea of what Centbee as a business and as a product consists of.
Yes, well, it consists of many different things. We think of ourselves as an ecosystem company. That's just because the whole sort of Bitcoin ecosystem isn't really fleshed out yet in terms of how people acquire Bitcoin and how they use it and how they hold it. So we've decided to think holistically and try and tackle the end-to-end journey of a user, where they would actually be able to acquire Bitcoin very easily and then hold it, and then of course most importantly use it. So we have a few pillars which form the base of Centbee. Of course it all starts around the wallet. That was our initial product. But what we did then is we rolled out a voucher system where people could easily purchase Bitcoin at most major retailers across the country. And then at the moment we are busy about to roll out our pilot, which is a cross-border remittance solution.
Right, so it's complicated because on the surface you download the Centbee wallet on your phone, but behind the scenes and for you as a business, there's all this other stuff that goes on that helps people to use it. Just let's talk about, and I'm going to add in the show notes the little film that you showed at the CoinGeek conference in Toronto that shows a freelance worker who gets paid using Centbee.
Yes, so the idea there is that at least we were seeing people were purchasing Bitcoin. And if you're a crypto enthusiast, if you've been in the Bitcoin space for a long time, you're not really the right kind of person in terms of the rest of the world, how they see Bitcoin. Because obviously people who've been involved with Bitcoin have ideas about economics and so on, and they've been studying it for a long time, and they're all excited about the trading aspects. But we are not really focused on that group of crypto enthusiasts. We're very interested in trying to get the world to adopt Bitcoin. And so what we did was we put our product out into the market. We haven't really started marketing it at the moment, but we noticed people were starting to accumulate Bitcoin and purchase Bitcoin through our voucher system at retailers. And we were just interested to see, what is it about Bitcoin that they are interested in? Are they just buying it to speculate on, or do they have other reasons to do so?
So let's just talk through what the experience would be for people using your system. Mm-hmm. Alice has provided some professional service for Bob, and she needs to get paid by Bob. So what does she need to do, and what does he need to do using your system to make that possible?
Okay, so now this is where we talk about the barcode that gets generated on the Centbee wallet.
That would be on Alice's.
Yes, so Alice wants to get paid, and so she'll print an invoice for Bob to pay.
So she'll generate it in her Centbee wallet.
Well, the invoice will be generated just through her normal system. She'll create a paper invoice with the service, the name, and so on. But what she will do is she will go into her Centbee wallet and she will generate a barcode. And that barcode has embedded in it the value that should be paid. So if it was pounds, it would be £100 value.
So
barcode.
she has to specify that when she generates it.
That's right. So if she's going to be issuing an invoice to her customer and the customer owes her £100, then she will create a barcode that is a £100 barcode, but which is also linked to her SentB wallet. So then what she can do is she can take a screenshot of that or print it out onto a piece of paper, and then Bob will go to his local grocer and he'll say, I want to pay this bill, please. The grocer will then scan that barcode on their system. And at that point, on the terminal, the cashier will see, oh, this is a £100 barcode. And they'll say, please, can you hand over £100? So then Bob will go and pay with his credit card or pay cash £100. And at that point, as soon as the payment is made, SentB Wallet will send you £100 worth of Bitcoin directly to Alice's wallet. So that's basically the process. Printing a barcode, generating a barcode in your SentB wallet, printing it on a piece of paper, then the payer taking it to the retailer, getting the barcode scanned, handing over the money, and immediately that amount of Bitcoin landing on Alice's wallet.
Does it make a difference if the value of Bitcoin has changed during this process?
It doesn't, because the amount of Bitcoin is only calculated at that moment. So as soon as Bob wants to pay £100, it's at that moment that we calculate the spot rate and send £100 of value at that moment to Alice.
Right.
So she will get it as £100, and then maybe the next day it will have fluctuated.
So the interesting thing about this is that the people involved don't really even need to know anything about Bitcoin or even know that it's involved, do they?
Well, Alice is the only one that needs to know.
She's getting it in BSV.
She's receiving the Bitcoin. Bob doesn't need to know, because he's going to just take a barcode on a piece of paper to a retailer. He's just going to pay over with cash or whatever it is. And the retailer doesn't know what's being paid for. They just know that this is a barcode that's being scanned. In fact, the terminology that we use is paying a bill. Because that's what most of them understand, that people will usually come in with a barcode that is a bill of some sort.
It sounds brilliant, but I mean, I don't want to get too technical here, but could this have been done just using local currency? I mean, why does Bitcoin need to be part of your system?
Well, in the video, Laura, she speaks about there being a thing about cash. You know, the customers don't have cash on them, and if there's banks involved, then it takes time and so on. So I think that it certainly is more convenient if the user wants to get Bitcoin. Obviously, the whole question is now, why would they want to have Bitcoin? And I think this is going to be something that more and more people start embracing over time. Obviously, the price being so volatile, it is difficult. But I think that more and more people are going to see the value in that very efficient mechanism that allows you to really receive money much quicker than you would using any other system.
Let's just go back a bit in history, because I know that your sort of personal involvement with this subject comes really from your own background. You were born in Zimbabwe, and obviously for anyone brought up in Zimbabwe, money is a very, very important issue in their lives, I suppose, isn't it? I mean, how did that affect you?
Well, that was really what got me thinking about money in general. During the 2008 crisis, I mean, this was before the global financial crisis, the Zimbabwe dollar died catastrophically, and that really got me interested in the whole idea of money and where it comes from and what gives it value and how is it possible that currency can become hyperinflated. And we also had I had family that was impacted by it, and so that really got me thinking about the whole economics of money, where it comes from, and then also at that time I was building out payment systems for smart grid electricity grids. And we had a lot of people from other African countries in South Africa, where I was living at the time. And, so this idea of Bitcoin kind of just landed in front of me. And, it seemed like such a wonderful solution for a country like Zimbabwe. This idea of a sound digital money, the first
Except
time.
that the sort of volatility of Bitcoin probably was sort of rivaled only by Zimbabwe's own currency.
Well, having gone through that hyperinflation, it was it was tolerable in comparison.
Right.
Something that could go up 10% a day, that's nothing,
Right.
or down. So, but of course, as you could see that it's a technology that is still in its infancy. There's a lot of uncertainty around it, specifically from in the regulatory environment. Regulators are still trying to get to grips with it. But and also I remember the 90s. I was a computer science student, and how the internet was being born, and it was confusing, and nobody understood it, and complicated. But I saw how that all unfolded, and I felt like, well, here we have another technology. It's in its infancy. It's confusing to most. It's based on a sound economic thinking, which is something that I was suddenly aware of. And I just thought, well, if this unfolds in the same way as the internet, then there must be a possibility that this will change the world. And so, there were a lot of different things that got me really excited about it. But of course, it was specifically around, the idea that people can use this, and obviously as sound money, but as a digital payment method that has very low barrier to entry. It means that people can now pay for things that they couldn't before. So we were building electricity vending systems, but we had a lot of customers who didn't have bank accounts, and if they ran out of electricity and they wanted to go and buy it, they would have to go find a vendor. Most of the time they used cash, which was increased the costs, and I thought, well, Bitcoin would be a perfect solution for that. So I built Bitcoin into our vending system at that time. But the company wasn't that excited about it. I think Bitcoin at that stage was tainted with the idea of Silk Road and how people were using it for all these different things.
But then you were hoping that people in other places around the world would be able to sort of crowdfund energy to some African schools and so on, is that?
Yeah, so then once I realized I couldn't carry on with this commercial company doing this, I started thinking of other ways to use Bitcoin, and I founded a company called Ban Ki-moon, which was essentially an advisory company, a consulting company, and I spent a lot of time at conferences talking to people about the potential use cases of Bitcoin. But this idea of being able to create some kind of organization, a charity organization that can make use of payments much more efficiently than organizations do today, where a donor can directly fund the needs of some little African school by paying Bitcoin for energy. I just thought that was such a great use case.
Cut out all the infrastructure of big NGOs.
Yes, it means that there's no or very little admin costs. There's no corruption. All the payments are visible and go directly to the meter and purchase the energy. There's no waste. So it just seemed like such a nice way for a donor to donate to a cause they believe in without having to worry about where is that money in fact going? Is it being spent on the thing that I want to spend it on? And then I decided to stop talking about that and actually create that. And so then we set up this whole pilot and we showed how it would work and so on. So that was something that I was quite passionate about. And I thought that there was a positive use case about Bitcoin that we could present to people and say, look, it's not just for drug dealers and money launderers, and that's why I wanted to speak on the virtue of such a thing.
Because your background, and you've talked about your dad who was a teacher, has given you, I'm sort of being a bit of the amateur psychologist here, but you have a sort of social mission behind your work with CentBee, don't you? Which is odd because CentBee, most sort of new financial systems and so on are not set up with that kind of dimension as part of their sort of being, but I have a feeling that the whole involvement of Bitcoin in Southern Africa means more to you than just an efficient way to run a new startup business and make some money. Yes, absolutely. That has always motivated me because of my background. And when you live in a country like South Africa or Zimbabwe, there's a lot that can be done to help people, and it's difficult to, at least for me, to think I have this great opportunity where I can make a wonderful difference in people's lives, and then just
ignore all that. I think that would have been very difficult. And I mean, that's what inspired me about Bitcoin, is that it was this technology that can literally make the world a better place. And you can see it there in Africa. It's tangible. We have currencies that are failing, and we have high costs of moving money. Financial services that are inaccessible. So it's almost, I don't know how anyone cannot see the opportunity there to help a huge number of people with Bitcoin.
I can see completely what you're talking about in terms of the potential, but it's actually 10 years since Bitcoin was invented. Has that all just been sort of wasted time, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I think that it's now, Bitcoin isn't just this strange thing. I think it's become something that now is on most people's radar, maybe not always for the best reasons, but now we see regulators are actively engaging in this. Large corporates are trying to get in on the game, and I think that a lot of thinking has been done, and also in the early days there was a lot of fear around something like Bitcoin being just taken up by criminals and being used for all sorts of nefarious things.
Well, it was.
It certainly was. But I think that the idea of it being a transparent ledger, something that can be easily audited and there can be oversight, I think that is now becoming more obvious to regulators, because at the end of the day, that's all they really want, is to know that there can be oversight and they can understand it's not just all happening underground.
But do you think that, it's great that regulators are sort of helping rather than hindering the development, but do you think that as time goes on, regulators and then governments will sort of adopt Bitcoin to the extent that it's successful, and then it'll be just as much a bureaucratic and slowed down system?
I always have I always wonder about the monetary aspect of Bitcoin, because clearly countries want to have absolute control over their currency.
They may want to print money in certain economic situations,
yes,
which they can't with Bitcoin.
That's right, and there might be resistance on that level, but I think most governments now are seeing it as a technology platform. I know that our own central bank is experimenting putting a currency on a blockchain. And so, I think with all these different things that are happening in terms of corporates perhaps trying to embrace blockchain, that will probably be where a lot of the adoption comes from, trying to look at blockchain as a data platform or something like that. But it is interesting how it's going to happen that a government allows Bitcoin to become some kind of legal tender. Now, what I have been seeing in Zimbabwe is they're a particularly good example of, when all else fails, what is there that can solve the problems. And they've been talking about, maybe adopting something like a tether or a stable coin type system, because there's a lot of resistance to they're trying to reintroduce the Zimbabwe dollar, and of course the people there's a lot of resistance to that. So I think that in that particular worst case scenario, it becomes more likely that the country, at least the people of the country, will start adopting something like Bitcoin. And then, once that takes off, it'll be increasingly difficult for the government to try and stop that. Now, is that what it's going to take to get Bitcoin to become widely used and adopted? A currency failure? Economically, I think that is perhaps something that is in our future. I think that currencies around the world, this idea of a fiat currency, I don't think it has a long future. I think, we're in a very pivotal moment right now in terms of that, and there might be a sort of generalized currency collapse around the world if you follow that.
Well, funny enough, when I talked to Craig Wright about this,
yes.
I sort of said, should we be looking forward to a sort of general economic collapse, because then that'll be great for Bitcoin? And he said no. He definitely doesn't want to think like that. And I think one interesting thing about the relation between Bitcoin and governments is the question of taxation, where Bitcoin, in fact, has quite a sort of positive story to tell. I mean, doesn't it, really?
Yes, well, taxation on Bitcoin is extremely easy. I mean, if you think about the transparent ledger, but if you're an accountable institution and you're receiving funds and making payments on Bitcoin, all that information is available on the blockchain.
So that the cash economy could be improved or, sidestepped with that system, I guess.
Definitely from the perspective of corporates and businesses today, if you were to think about a smart contract that could pay a tax collector directly on the transaction, for that good as a sales tax. I mean, that's a very efficient mechanism of tax collecting. So I think that tax authorities, once they understand that, and we're actually doing a lot of educating in that regard for our tax authorities, I think they're going to start embracing it and perhaps even one day requiring that businesses and individuals pay tax in that way on Bitcoin through some kind of smart contract system.
Most of the entrepreneurs who are working with Bitcoin SV, it seems to me, are in Australia or Canada or Western Europe or Hong Kong or places like that. When you get together with other people who are also entrepreneurs, what is it like? Do they understand what it's like coming from Africa and working in Africa? You have a very specific perspective. How does that sort of play out?
Yes, well, I think the whole Zimbabwe thing became a global thing, that speaks a lot about how currency can become a massive problem. I think people generally get that, and also it's sort of well known that Africans don't have access to the same kind of financial infrastructure that the rest of the world have. So I do think that I have a unique opportunity down there, and that's why I'm so excited about Bitcoin and always have been, because I just see a world down in Africa that can be fixed with something like Bitcoin. Now, I certainly don't see that in a country like England or in the US. Things work pretty well. People have access to that kind of financial infrastructure. So, I always feel very lucky that I ended up, being born there and having this wonderful opportunity to take this novel new technology and to fix the way things are.
So do you think that in 20 years' time, say, people in Western Europe will be gradually getting used to the idea of Bitcoin because they've seen how well it works in Africa?
Yes, I do think so. I think that, there was always a cliche that Bitcoin will rise in Africa and it spread through the world, and I certainly see that. I think that, once it starts being used as a currency, by that stage I'm hoping that things like the volatility will have stabilized. Then, of course, we have a lot of people from Africa who live in other countries and are constantly sending money back home. If they can use Bitcoin to send money back to their family, well, then they're going to need a place to acquire that Bitcoin. There'll need to be Bitcoin businesses around the world. And I certainly see the more Bitcoin is used in Africa, the rest of the world will take note. And of course, it's not just an African thing. I mean, there are other developing economies out there that have the same sorts of problems. So I do think that it will, take off in that way, and then the rest of the world will take note.
I mean, how many people are there in your business at the moment, and going to, say, 10 years from now, what sort of size operation do you want it to be?
Well, we've got 10 at the moment, but we have very clearly defined separate little business entities operating within CENTB. We've got our cross-border money remittance product. We've got our CENTB wallet. We've got the what we call the voucher product, which is buying Bitcoin at retailers. We have a lot of other things that we would like to pursue as well. With the rise of MetaNet, for example, that's really opened up a lot of new ideas. And we've been thinking carefully about at least the infrastructure that supports CENTB. And as we are stabilizing that and making that more robust, we think that there could be a potential opportunity to provide MetaNet services to businesses and so on. So, in this case, it almost feels like we have this embarrassment of riches, all these opportunities in front of us. And the whole payment ecosystem is kind of one aspect of it, and that forms there's a whole lot of things happening there. But then this MetaNet idea, some kind of B2B business. So we will certainly be growing, I think, if we manage to tackle those different things. Each one of them have wonderful opportunities, and we might be able to spin those off into separate businesses. So in the next few years, I certainly see us growing, and seeing what this MetaNet thing, what it's capable of.
I mean, it must be a sort of classic startup dilemma, the choice between trying out all sorts of things and seeing which of them takes off, or really focusing on what you think is your best bet and putting everything into that.
Yes, that's right. And also, my co-founder Angus, he's much more pragmatic than I am and practical, and he really would like to create a flourishing business that creates wonderful products that users like and are willing to pay for. And I'm much more on the kind of geeky side of it. I like, I'm the technical person, I'm the engineer, the product developer, so I like building all these new fun things. But of course, as a business, we must think about becoming sustainable, self-sustaining, and so on. But there's so much opportunity, and it will be hard to focus.
I mean, compared to internet startups, as you mentioned back in the sort of turn of the millennium, it seems to me that Bitcoin startups don't require a massive investment. There aren't people going to venture capitalists and saying, please can we have 10 million quid or 20 million quid or whatever. You seem to be able to get a long way on a small amount of startup money, is that right?
Yes, well, South Africa is fairly cheap, and so it's a lot easier to get by with what you have. But also, we are a tech company, and we leverage services like Amazon Web Services and so on. So it is quite easy as a tech startup to kind of get your prototype out there, get your idea, and hosting it at a fairly low cost. So I think that's just a wonderful thing about the world we live in today, where it is easy to create a 21st century tech business on a shoestring.
On the other hand, you're dealing with people's money, so you can't afford to mess up, really, can you?
That's right. I think we haven't. When it comes to our engineers, specifically our security and infrastructure engineers, we decided to actually go and pay quite a high cost for them. We poached them from existing banks and financial institutions, so we're taking that very seriously. Obviously, as a non-custodial wallet, we don't have the same kind of risks that other companies would have. But it does sort of, it certainly keeps us up and makes us think carefully about what we do.
In terms of your sort of emotional involvement with the mission behind CentB, you told a lovely story about your own background and your dad's. I think you must have inherited some of his attitude to some of the sort of social problems around you in Zimbabwe and then South Africa.
Yes, absolutely. As a small child with my brother, being taken along with him to these strange places with people, it definitely stuck with me, and it's stayed with me my whole life. Even with my own children now, we do much the same thing. We do soup kitchens and so on. I think it's such an important thing in life to realize that every human being should be valued, has intrinsic value. I think we forget that in our busy modern lives. And I think that if you can be connected to people on that level, where you realize that every person that you see is valuable intrinsically, then it doesn't just make your life all about the day-to-day grind and trying to get through things. Just being able to interact with people and feel empathetic about their needs, that can certainly give you more meaning and purpose in what you're doing.
Do you think that growing up in Zimbabwe makes sort of anyone slightly more aware of being part of a wider society, albeit perhaps a slightly divided society, than here, if I was brought up in the suburbs or whatever, I'm not perhaps quite as aware of the wider community beyond my own little world.
Yes, I think so. In Africa, poverty is everywhere. It's all around you. It's impossible to ignore it. And you definitely see how people live, and it makes you a lot more grateful for what you have. I think it's really great that if you have some level of wealth and you are exposed to this all the time, it just gives you that feeling of I'm lucky to have what I have, and I should be compelled to assist in any way I can, and also a small amount of effort goes a long way. You don't have to do a lot to make a difference in somebody's life when they have nothing. So it's a very important thing for us as human beings to consider our neighbor, and to try and think about, in my own small way, uplifting the community around me to make at least that part of the world a better place.
It must be a bit upsetting for you that Bitcoin has this sort of negative image of it's bad for the environment because of the mining, there's the whole sort of drug connection, it's just speculation. I mean, if your business prospers, it's going to give a whole different image to the Bitcoin world, I suppose. Could do.
Absolutely. This has been the driving force, one of the driving forces behind my motivations is that I don't want people to look at this as something that is only for speculating on or for money laundering or whatever it is. I want people to see how good it is, and that's been what has driven me for years now. Every time I speak at a conference or I engage people on this level, I talk about the positive aspects. And I think that once upon a time back in the day, the internet was also a scary place. It had all these ideas of chat rooms and so on, and people were put off by that. But we realized then that actually there's all these wonderful benefits, and I spend all my time focusing on those wonderful benefits. And if I can deliver those to people, then in my small way I could have changed the perception, and we can get on with it.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Lorien.
My pleasure. Thank you, Charles.
Thanks very much to Lorien Gamaroff. This is the final episode in Season 1 of CoinGeek Conversations. After 30 weeks, we're taking a short break, but we'll be back with Season 2 on the 4th of September. If you've got any thoughts about what you'd like to hear more or less of in the podcast, do please let us know on Twitter @RealCoinGeek. And before we're back in September, you should book your tickets to the next CoinGeek conference, which is in Seoul, South Korea, at the start of October. You can find out more on coingeek.com. Thanks very much for listening, and from me, Charles Miller, goodbye for now.